Well, in today's podcast, we are going to feature Tom Gilson, who is going to walk us through his latest book, Too Good to Be False. And we're going to look at this rather novel argumentation for the historicity of Jesus, the Gospels, and much more. Stick around for the rest of the podcast.
SAF Podcast brings to you the coherent, cohesive, logical, and relevant defense of the Christian worldview. From laymen to experts in the field, everyone can tune in and be equipped. We also aim to introduce to the audience the plethora of work and research done in the field of Christian apologetics in defending the faith and the individuals who further the intellectual cause of Christianity by featuring the greatest minds of the Christian apologetics arena.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to yet another brand new episode of SAFT Podcast. And I am super thrilled to feature Tom Gilson. I must say, a rather prolific author, and he has shot up the ranks and the public acclaim with his latest book, Too Good to Be False. So, Tom, we are delighted to have you here on SAFT Podcast for your very first time.
Well, it's a delight to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me in.
So here's a quick outlay of how Tom has been doing so far. He has published 6 books and more than 600 articles at the Stream website, which, Tom, I believe is a news outlet with a Christian perspective.
That's right. Yeah, I like to say it's the go-to place here in America for Christian perspective on current events. So, yeah.
Right. And he's also a speaker and a blogger at The Thinking Christian. I'll be dropping links to all of his platforms, and they are must check out for everyone tuning in. So today we're going to look at Tom's latest book, Too Good to Be False. And I've been looking at the reviews by top scholars in the field about the book, and this is just an exciting book to get hold of. In fact, I was really taken aback to see Gary Habermas' review, and he said that he has not said this statement about any other book. He said that Too Good to Be False is a fun read, and that coming from a resurrection expert who is going to put together a 5,000 page on the resurrection. It's pretty delightful to hear him say it's a fun read. So, Tom, let's try and unpack what the book is about and what you're presenting in this brand new, exciting book. Let's start off with the name. The name says Too Good to Be False. And I guess it's a clear jab at when we say too good to be true. I mean, if a deal is too good to be true, it's not true. So right. What made you pick that name, Too Good to Be False?
Well, it goes back. I started working on this concept in 2012, when I was looking at Jesus' incredible power and incredible self-sacrificial other-centeredness, his love. And it hit me that you don't see that combination in any character in history or even in literature. And I thought, the skeptics think that he's false. They think that he's a product of legend. They think that he was a made-up, not a made-up person, but the best parts of his story, especially his supernatural, are just made up. And I realized that in order for that to be true, the legend process that they imagined would have had to come up with a character unlike any other anywhere in literature, especially except, and much less in history. And that just seems impossible. He is just too good to be legend, too good to be false.
So how did your research into this topic begin? I mean, like, at what point did you say, well, there is a lot more to it than what meets the eye. I'm going to dig deeper into it.
It's hard to say. That I don't know always where my ideas come from. I don't know where these things begin. I do know that concept hit me, and I started working on it 8 years ago. I wrote an article that was published in Touchstone magazine in 2014 in the May issue. I shared it with some people. Dan Wallace, the biblical scholar, said, you need to work on this a whole lot more. And I thought, well, I don't know what else to say. And it sat for years. But then, again, it's hard to say where these things come from, but I started to realize that the concepts by which I was approaching that that approach to Jesus could apply to others. And what it is, it's very unique. I don't know if anyone else who studied the Bible this way, but the unique thing about Jesus is that he had extraordinary power and he never used it for his own benefit.
Right.
In the story. And what I realized is I was doing a study on what Jesus never did.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other ways to approach things that Jesus never did in the story. And that's how I began to expand it into what became the first half of this book, part 1 of the book.
Right. And Dr. Frank Turek, in his short review of the book, points out like this very point about how you looked at what Jesus didn't say and what he didn't do. So basically, then what you're saying with the book is that the character of Jesus, when contrasted with historical persons and people of literature, whether they're fictional or non-fictional, sort of looks like, maybe I can say it in this way, out of this world, like unlike anything we have ever seen. And I know that the point that you just mentioned about Jesus not using his power, that is a very strong example. Can you expound a bit on that?
Yeah, he never used his extraordinary power for his own benefit. This is unique. Everyone who has any power at all, money, political power, military power, supernatural power in fiction, they end up doing something for themselves with it. And it's the best example of someone who comes close to being the quality of Jesus, I think, is Superman. He was modeled after Jesus, by the way, but Superman flies through space. Jesus created space. There's a difference in their power. And again, this is according to the story. This is just the way the story is conceived and written. Jesus had Superman had invulnerability. He had heat vision. He used that to protect himself. He used his heat vision to warm his coffee. And Jesus, every time he used his extraordinary power, it was for someone else. He was self-sacrificial in the extreme. When he came out of his 40 days of fasting, the devil said, you could turn these stones into bread. You're hungry. And the devil at that point was right. The devil, is strategically right when it helps him. And Jesus said, no, man does not live by bread alone. And time again, he gave the utmost when he went to the cross. He could have, and at the time of his arrest, he could have called on legions of angels to protect him there. But he gave and he gave. He was, as Bonhoeffer put it, the man for others. And you just don't see that anywhere among people who have unusual power. Lord Acton said, power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men. And Abraham Lincoln said that nearly every man can withstand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power. Jesus is the extreme, absolute good opposite of the person who is corrupted by power.
Right. And I remember seeing a short clip from Superman where he uses laser vision to shave his beard. So that,
oh, really? I hadn't seen that one.
So he looks at the mirror, he puts on the cream, and he reflects the light from the X-ray vision. I think this laser onto his beard to shave it off. So I guess the one point that came to my mind is so what you're arguing here is that the character of Jesus, like we mentioned, is in stark contrast to what we have seen anywhere. So it sort of beggars belief to say that the disciples were sort of concocting this person who is unlike anything normally that we have seen in reality or in fiction. So what if someone says, well, Jesus used his power at the resurrection? I mean, he did not give in completely. He used his power to resurrect himself and prove himself. So how would that come into play with what you're arguing with?
Yeah, you have to back it all the way up to the reason that this resurrection happened, which is ultimately for us. He didn't have to die. He didn't. And when we have this, I think, false conception when we talk about Jesus didn't have to die. I think that what happens with a lot of us is we have in the back of our mind a kind of a normal death, a normal life rather, where you have to die. And yeah, Jesus didn't have to die. What we, I think, fall into is the trap of thinking, well, what that means is Jesus didn't have to die that way. Jesus didn't have to die that brutal, excruciating torture method of death.
Right.
But the fact is, Jesus didn't have to die. He didn't have to die. Death is a result of sin. Jesus came to the earth sinless. But it goes back even further than that, because, well, let me go back to a story that I read in the news a year or two ago. It happened in India. There was a man there who sued his parents for wrongful birth. He did. He said, you know, you shouldn't have brought me into the world, but since you did, you have to compensate me for it. Well, I'm here to tell you, as parent of two kids, you do compensate your kids. They're not free, but but there was a sense in there that if he had given informed advance consent, he would have been okay with it, which is a ridiculous thought, except there is one person who actually agreed with informed consent to be born, and that's Jesus. The resurrection was part of a package that started with the incarnation that was for us. He didn't have to give up. He did not have to empty himself, as it says in Philippians 2. He did not have to do that. He did it for us. He didn't have to start out as a child who had to learn to speak Aramaic, and he did not have to. He did not have to go through all of that. He did not have to suffer through the trial and the pre-execution beatings. He did not have to die on the cross. But once he did, yeah, he had to resurrect, because that was part of the whole process by which he conquered Satan for us. The resurrection was for us because it was part of a package for us.
Right. And I guess there's this one point that I've often heard pastors in our churches speak, that, you know, after Jesus resurrected, he did not appear himself to the Pharisees or the priests or Pilate even to show off and say, hey, I'm back. You know, you try to get rid of me, I'm back. That would have been a display of his power, you know, trying to get back at these people. And I guess the audience in India would immediately understand about how we boost up the heroic image when it comes to movies. Like, we go way beyond, and especially in movies in India, like if you need to bring the hero out of a police station, the directors and the scriptwriters would push in 50 cars and 3 helicopters and a big array of ministers coming to take the hero out of the police station. And that sort of feels goosebump for the audience. And that's how movies are very commercial here. So contrasting with that, it makes sense. I mean, why would the disciples want to say that Jesus suffered at the hands of the Romans and was, you know, looked down and mocked down upon? I mean, it sort of beggars belief that they had to make up such a story. I mean, of all the things that they could make up, there doesn't seem to be any reason as they would want to push such a character. All the way,
there's just a lot of, well, compare, for example, the legendary gospels that did appear in the next century in the 2nd century. We have stories of Jesus coming out of the tomb 50 feet tall,
and
where it's
a huge cross by his side.
Yeah, where it's embellished with fantastic stuff. Well, you may say that the resurrection is fantastic, but there's a sense also, he walks through walls. Okay, there's very little of the show off. There's very little of that kind of embellishment. He's just meeting people and having meals with them and continuing to teach them. This is not the way legends usually grow. It stayed too well contained to look like a legend.
Right. So moving on, you mentioned another particular point, and I was just hinting this to my mother a few minutes before the recording, and she also felt this was like mind-blowing. And I think you've mentioned this, that this is something that no one has, according to your knowledge and according to my knowledge as well, no one has ever talked about. Jesus does not speak about his faith in God. And
He doesn't.
that is very interesting. Can you expound a bit on that? I think the audience also would be very thrilled to hear that.
Yeah. And by the way, if anyone watching this podcast knows of an exception, I want to hear it. I want to know where someone else has talked about this before. There is no place anywhere in the Bible that mentions Jesus' faith. He never talks about his faith. The gospel writers never mention he had faith. The epistles never mention Jesus' faith. And that's striking for a couple of reasons. You can't always draw good conclusions from the absence of evidence. Arguments from silence are difficult to establish. But in this case, I think we would expect him to mention his faith. His other virtues get mentioned all over the place. His love, his compassion, his prayerfulness, his obedience, and I could go on. Paul mentioned his faith at least 20 times in the epistles. So it's not wrong to talk about your faith. It's not wrong to talk about your virtues. Jesus' virtues got mentioned, but that one didn't. Why? Didn't he have faith? He was the teacher. That was his number one most frequent topic to teach on. He taught about faith more often than he mentioned love. It's just striking. It should be there, shouldn't it? And why isn't it? The best I've been able to come up with, and not everyone's going to agree on this. There are people who will say that, he did have faith and he displayed it. Well, I certainly would say he was not lacking in trust. There's no sign that there's no way we can go to saying that Jesus was short on trust in the Father. But I wonder if maybe it's because what faith really is, faith is a knowledge-based trust relationship.
Right.
You know that which you are trusting well enough to put real trust in it for good reasons. But there's always at least some question in it. You might say, if you're doing a big project for work, you might say, I have faith in myself that I can accomplish this. Why? Because you know yourself and you know the project and you're pretty sure you can do it. I have faith in myself, I can continue this. But there is an element of the unknown. You could get sick. You could run into a snag. You could run into a hard person to get along with, whatever. But so you've got some knowledge, you got some question. And that's when you use the word faith. You do not use the word faith when you say something like, I have faith that I can scratch my eyebrows. It's just the wrong word to use for it, because for those who have normal medical, who are normal medical condition, there's just no question there. It would just be stupid to use the word. I think that's probably the case with Jesus, is that his relationship with the Father was a knowledge-based relationship to the extent that faith, okay, he could have used it, but it would have just been the wrong word. Just as, I have faith that I can scratch my eyebrows. It's just the wrong word to use. I think that's why we don't see that. And what that indicates, not by way of proof, but what that shows all through the Gospels, is that he had a relationship with the Father that was that close. It's an indicator of his deity.
Right. And I guess we can use that as part of the cumulative case in point towards deity. We may not need to take it set apart as a standalone argument, but we can easily bring it along as a cumulative case. When I was looking at J P Moreland's review of the book, he says that the book fills in a huge gap in contemporary apologetics, if I recall right. What is Professor Moreland referring to?
Yeah, the gap is that there are, it's a new apologetic argument, really.
Right.
This argument has not been published in at least 90 years. And the form of the argument is that the skeptics propose that the story of Jesus was the product of legendary development across multiple countries, across multiple cultures and languages over a period of decades. And that, this is how the story changed. Bart Ehrman uses that word when he talks about it. He says that there was a telephone game effect where, from one person to the next, you tell the story and the story and the story. And he says, what happens to stories when they, people hear it third, fourth, even 19th hand, he says the stories change. Well, no, I think he really understated that. Stories get screwed up. They get corrupted. They get distorted badly when they do that. And what I'm saying is that from the evidence of the stories themselves, what we have is we don't have signs that it was corrupted to the degree it should have been. We have questions about how many angels were at Jesus' tomb. Okay. What we don't have is anybody making the mistake, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, whoever wrote those, and skeptics' view, we don't have anybody making the mistake of going, oops, we put in this thing about Jesus' faith. We don't have anybody in there just kind of casually inserting, thus says the Lord, coming from Jesus' mouth. He never said that. We don't have anybody putting in there that Jesus used his extraordinary powers for his own benefit. And one thing after another, where the story could have been distorted, instead what we have is a completely consistent picture of the character of Jesus. It should have been scrambled. It isn't. So the skeptic's view of where the story came from doesn't fit the story that we have.
Right. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And so you said that this argument has been published in over 90 years. So what was the last entry of this argument 90 years before? What was that? What was it that back then?
Yeah, it was, you can see traces of it. You can see forms of it rather in William Paley, Philip Schaff, Atticus Haygood, C.A. Rao. And they basically, in their versions of it, their approaches to it, they didn't write whole books on it. Actually, Horace Bushnell did something like it. Interestingly, it's an incredible picture. Horace Bushnell's book, how the character of Jesus precluding the possibility of his being human, merely human. That's not the exact title. It's an incredible picture of the glory of Christ, which is amazing because Horace Bushnell was not a Trinitarian. But it's still a really good book. It's amazing. What they did was essentially the same thing. They said that this is not the kind of story that looks like myth or legend. It's different now, however, because the legend theory has been developed to such an extent that I think it's more vulnerable. They've got it nailed down to not a perfect degree. And by the way, not every skeptic tells the story or the proposal, the theory in exactly the same way.
Right.
But they've got it nailed down to such a degree that it's easy to show that what the Gospels came out as, the way the story is, as we have received it, does not fit the way the story was developed in their theories.
Right.
It's their theories are more vulnerable now than they were when these previous authors wrote on it.
Okay, so the next question is critical. What has been the response from the atheist community? Has anyone taken a serious response, or how has it been?
Their response has been to completely misunderstand. It's been, I have not yet had a response from someone who has read the book. Instead, what they're doing is they're listening to podcasts and interviews, and they're drawing entirely wrong conclusions. I think the funniest one was a video done by a skeptic who goes by the name of Paul Logia, P-A-U-L-E-I-A. And he went on and on where this is an interesting thing about the story of Jesus, okay? He is perfect from start to finish. There is no character growth in Jesus. And I covered this. I had 4 pages on this in my book. And I said, this is very unusual in a story to have a character who doesn't grow from start. He's perfect from start to finish. Well, Paul Logia picked that up. And he said, how can you call that a good story? Stories with perfect characters are boring stories. They're called Mary Sues in fan fiction. People who write too good characters who are too good, and they're just not interesting, and they're forgettable. Well, he missed the part where I said that myself, and where I said there's something here that, my goodness, has Jesus been forgotten? Jesus should be forgettable.
Right.
There's
If
no
it's
character
boring.
growth.
That,
Why isn't he boring? There's
right.
something very unique about this story of Jesus. We have a
Hmm.
character who doesn't grow, and yet far from being forgettable, he is millions and millions, maybe billions of people across thousands of cultures for thousands of years have considered him the most compelling character that they have ever encountered. This is not the kind of thing that somebody can just come up with by the telephone game.
Right.
He's different. This is not your ordinary legend.
Right. And I recall this quote from Napoleon where he says, "What is unique about Jesus of Nazareth? I am invigorating my people to pick up the sword and come and fight for me. And here is Jesus in all his meekness, and there are far more people willing to lay down their lives for this meek guy." I mean,
That's right.
and Hitler in the book Third Reich, Hitler's quote is mentioned where he asked, "Why did we get the meekness of Christianity? Why wasn't it the fatherland fervent of Japan, or the willingness of to die of the Mohammedan religion?" That's the word that Hitler used. I'm paraphrasing his quote. So world leaders, like you mentioned, people who've used power for their own pleasure, have also identified what is unique about this meek guy. The people all want to stand by him and speak about him and even sacrifice their lives at the risk of sharing about him. I mean, I didn't expect Apologia to do that. He's actually comparatively quite smart compared to other YouTube atheists on
Right.
average. But that's interesting. And I guess they've all committed the error that I too have committed. When I looked at the title, Too Good to Be False, I thought, okay, I don't see anything nuanced here. The title looks pretty normal. And in one of the reviews of the book, also, one of the reviewer has also pointed it out, where he said that he too looked at the title and he felt this is normal until he read the book. And so I would like to honestly urge whoever is listening to the podcast, if you are able to get hold of the book, you need to get hold of it. Even if you look at the reviews of the book, I'm sure that is going to change your mind completely if this podcast has not done it. And I'm 100% sure that this podcast is not going to do proper justice to such an awesome book. We're just scraping off at the surface, picking up just under 10 questions to try and figure it out and to give you some insight to boost you and to get you to get hold of the book and equip yourself and to, as others have said, to fall in worship, seeing the beauty of Christ and his reality. So, Tom, as we come to the conclusion of the podcast, who is this book for? Is it a scholarly book? Is it for lay people? I know Gary Habermas said it's fun read, but it's Gary Habermas saying it's a fun read. So,
Right.
is it for lay people? Is it for scholars?
Well, it came out broader than I expected. And what I mean by that is I wrote it with lay people in mind, and the idea that you could use it for group study. There's questions in the back for group study. You can use it in your church. But, and as Gary said, it's a fun read. I've heard that from lay people as well. There's a lot of stories in it. There's a lot of surprises in it. And so that's the original intent. But Craig Evans, New Testament scholar at Houston Baptist University, said that there's material in there too that the professionals can gain from. He used that term, professionals, because it's a different approach to Jesus and a new apologetic argument. But at the end of it, there's 3 parts to the book. The third part is called Jesus No Matter What. And the point that I come to at the end is Jesus. Well, part 1 is about Jesus being greater than we knew. Part 2 is about how he's too good to be false. In other words, the story of Jesus is not just great, it's also true. But the final part is my encouragement to say to Christians everywhere, follow Jesus no matter what. Because why? Because he is so great. And because he gave his life for you, gave his life for me, and he's worthy of following. My goodness. Jesus, the verse I always use when I sign the book is Habakkuk 2:14, that the knowledge of the glory of the Lord would fill the earth as the waters cover the sea. The glory of Jesus is astonishing. It's extraordinary. He is so good. We should be following him.
Amen. Amen. And amen to that. Thank you so much, Tom, for being with us on the podcast. And I am much enthralled with what you've undertaken in the book. And I'm sure that the audience who are tuning into the podcast will be excited to get hold of the book and dive in, because this is not just an apologetics book. This is a book that makes you fall in adoration and worship at who Jesus is, because he's not just great, he's not just good, he is true, he is real, and he is someone, as Tom has pointed out, someone who laid down his life for us, even when he could have chosen not to even enter creation in the form of man. So once again, Tom, for being here with us, we're very much delighted to have you here with us.
Well, thank you, Jacob.
And so I'll be dropping the links to the book, where you can get the book, as well as all of Tom's website and his main articles that you can find on stream. So thank you for joining us, and we will be back with yet another topic and yet another guest in the next podcast. God bless.